Who is she? The question cut through the luxurious lounge at the exact moment Kang Min-Jae forgot he was angry. And that never happened. Not to him. Not anymore. 1 second earlier, the entire VIP floor of Noir Lounge had been seconds away from bloodshed. Crystal glasses trembled faintly against marble tables. Bodyguards stood tense with hands near concealed weapons. Wealthy politicians and businessmen watched nervously from the shadows, pretending not to stare, while the most feared mafia boss in Seoul stood face to face with the owner of the lounge. The atmosphere felt dangerous, heavy, one wrong sentence away from violence. You think you can steal from me? Min-Jae asked quietly, and somehow his quiet voice sounded more terrifying than shouting. The lounge owner swallowed hard. Sir, it's not like that. Then explain it correctly. Min-Jae stood motionless beneath the dim gold lighting. Long black hair brushed lightly against the collar of his expensive black coat. Tattoos disappeared beneath the open neckline of his shirt, while silver rings wrapped around elegant fingers that looked too beautiful for the violence they carried. And his eyes, God, those eyes looked empty. Not sad, not angry, empty, like kindness had died there years ago. The owner's breathing became uneven. Everybody in the lounge knew the stories about Kang Min-Jae, the Devil of Seoul, the man whose enemies disappeared mysteriously, the man who built an empire through fear before turning 30, the man who had forgotten how to feel anything except control. And tonight, someone had stolen from him, which meant somebody was about to suffer. Min-Jae tilted his head slightly. Last chance. Then suddenly, piano music filled the room. Soft, beautiful, wrong timing. Everybody froze. Actually froze. Because while the entire lounge drowned in tension, someone had started playing music. The first piano note floated gently through the air like rain touching fire. Then another, and somehow the atmosphere changed. Min-Jae's bodyguard turned sharply toward the stage immediately. What the hell is she doing? But Min-Jae didn't answer, because he had stopped hearing the room, stopped hearing the arguments, stopped hearing the fear. All he heard was the piano. A woman sat beneath the soft spotlight at the grand piano, completely unaware she had just interrupted a Mafia confrontation. Her large afro hair framed her beautiful dark face softly, while elegant black fabric wrapped around her body beautifully. Her fingers moved gently across the piano keys, and then she started singing. Sometimes the lonely hearts hide behind the loudest silence. Min-Jae froze completely, because suddenly he was 10 years old again, sitting beside his mother while she played piano softly in the dark before bedtime, before death, before violence, before he became Kang Min-Jae. The song wrapped around the room, gently, warmly, painfully, and for the first time in years, something inside him moved. The lounge owner noticed immediately. Everybody did, because Kang Min-Jae was staring at the woman like the world had disappeared around her. And maybe it had. Anna smiled softly while playing, completely unaware dozens of terrified rich people were watching her nervously. Because, unlike everybody else in the room, Anastasia Azikwe could not see fear. She had been blind since childhood, which meant she couldn't see the guns, couldn't see the bodyguards, couldn't see the violence in Min-Jae's eyes. All she knew was that somebody in the room sounded unbearably sad, and she hated sadness, especially lonely sadness. The song ended slowly. Silence swallowed the lounge instantly afterward. Then suddenly, applause exploded everywhere. Loud, relieved, like everybody had just survived something. Anna smiled politely while standing carefully beside the piano. Then, softly, "Thank you." Her Nigerian accent curled warmly around the words. Min-Jae kept staring, too intensely, dangerously intensely. His bodyguard frowned slightly beside him. "Boss." Silence. Then quietly, "Who is she?" The manager rushed over nervously immediately. That's Anastasia Azikwe, sir. Everybody calls her Anna. She performs here 3 nights a week. Min-Jae's eyes never left her. Interesting. Very interesting. Because somehow the emptiness inside his chest had gone quiet while she played. And that disturbed him deeply. Anna carefully adjusted herself beside the piano before turning slightly toward the room. Then, unexpectedly, her head tilted softly toward Min-Jae's direction, like she could feel him staring. A tiny smile touched her lips. "Well," she said casually into the microphone, "whoever almost murdered somebody earlier can relax now. The song is over." The entire lounge stopped breathing. One bodyguard nearly choked. The owner turned pale immediately, because nobody spoke to Kang Min-Jae like that. Silence. Heavy silence. Then, unexpectedly, a laugh escaped Min-Jae's mouth. Small, low, real. The entire lounge froze harder, because the Devil of Seoul did not laugh. Ever. Anna smiled softly hearing it. Oh, that sound was beautiful. Dangerous man. Sad man. Interesting man. Your music is distracting, Min-Jae said calmly while walking toward the stage slowly. The bodyguards immediately followed behind him. Anna heard the footsteps and smiled slightly. You sound emotionally unavailable. A few people gasped instantly. Min-Jae stopped directly in front of her now, close enough to notice. Her soft perfume, the tiny scar near her wrist, the intelligence hidden behind her smile. And God, she was beautiful, painfully beautiful. Anna tilted her head slightly upward. You're staring. Min-Jae went still immediately. How do you know? You stopped breathing normally. Silence. Then, quietly, you can tell that? Anna smiled softly. Lonely people sound different. That sentence hit him harder than threats ever had. Because nobody, not once, had ever described him that accurately before. Min-Jae looked at her silently, then suddenly noticed it. Her unfocused eyes, the way she reached carefully near the piano edge, slightly. The realization hit, slowly. She's blind, one businessman whispered nearby. The entire atmosphere shifted instantly. Pity entered the room. Whispers followed immediately. She's beautiful, though. Such a shame. A blind pianist? No wonder she performs here. Anna's smile faded, slightly hearing the whispers. Min-Jae noticed immediately. And suddenly, something cold entered his chest. Not toward her, toward them. Enough. The single word silenced the entire lounge instantly. Min-Jae's voice lowered dangerously. She plays better than all of you breathe. Silence. Anna blinked slowly, then unexpectedly laughed softly. Well, damn, she murmured. That was aggressively romantic. Another laugh almost escaped him. Almost. Dangerous woman. You always flirt with strangers this confidently? He asked quietly. Anna folded her arms slightly. You always sound one inconvenience away from homicide. His bodyguards physically looked away to hide reactions. Min-Jae stared at her. Then, unexpectedly, you're funny. Anna gasped dramatically. Oh my God, is that a compliment? Somebody write this date down. Date. Interesting word. Min-Jae noticed it immediately. Unfortunately, so did Anna. Oops. The tension shifted instantly. Warmer now. Slower. More dangerous. Anna swallowed lightly, because his silence suddenly felt heavier, more focused, and somehow she could feel him looking at her mouth. You became quiet, she whispered softly. You became nervous. Anna blinked. Well, she fixed her dress slightly. That feels emotionally disrespectful. A faint smirk touched Min-Jae's mouth. God, that almost smile alone could ruin lives. You play beautifully, he said quietly after a moment. Anna softened slightly. My mother taught me. Silence. Then, unexpectedly, mine too. Anna froze softly. The room disappeared slightly around them. Min-Jae's voice changed when he said that. Softer. Sad. Like touching the memory hurt. She used to play for me every night, he said quietly, before she died. Anna's chest tightened instantly. Oh, so that was the sadness she heard. What happened after she died? She asked gently. Silence. Long silence. Then, quietly, everything. That one word nearly broke her heart, because she understood immediately. This man did not become darkness, naturally. Life made him this way. Anna smiled softly, and for reasons he couldn't explain, that smile felt warm. Like home. Dangerous feeling. Very dangerous. He stood there in front of her for another long moment before his bodyguard cleared his throat from a respectful 10 meters away, and the spell broke and the evening continued. The confrontation with the lounge owner was resolved the way Min-Jae resolved most things, quietly, completely, with no room left for negotiation. The man who had stolen from him left the building lighter by everything he owned and heavier by the kind of fear that does not go away in the morning. Min-Jae did not stay to oversee it. He stood outside in the rain long after Anna had been escorted safely to a car and stared at the place on the stage where she had sat and thought about the song, the exact song, the way it had moved through him like something physical. He pressed his knuckle against his sternum. Something in there that had been very still for a very long time had shifted. He did not like it. He did not know yet that he would spend the next 3 months chasing it. Later, much later, after the lounge had emptied and the bodyguards had drifted to a respectful distance, after the man who had stolen from Min-Jae had been handled with a kind of cold, quiet efficiency that Min-Jae normally would have overseen personally, Min-Jae sat alone at table 12 and realized he hadn't thought about business in 2 hours. He sat with a glass of whiskey he hadn't drunk and thought about a woman with music in her hands and sadness she refused to become. He thought, this is not safe. He thought I should leave. He did not leave. He sat there until the cleaning staff arrived at 2 a.m, and then he drove home through empty Seoul streets and stood at his penthouse window until dawn turned the city gold and thought about the specific shape of her smile and the way she had said his name like it was a question she already knew the answer to. He told himself it meant nothing. He knew, in the place where people keep the truths they aren't ready to say out loud, that he was already lost. The next night, Kang Min-Jae came back. Then the next night, then the next. Always the same table, always watching her play, always silent, and every single time he brought flowers. Nobody on the staff could believe it. They whispered behind their hands when he arrived. This man who caused governments to tremble, sitting quietly at table 12 with long legs crossed and dark eyes fixed entirely on a woman who couldn't see him back. A bodyguard named CO once tried to suggest perhaps the boss could call ahead to ensure the seat was reserved. Min-Jae had looked at him so slowly, so completely without expression, that CO reserved the seat himself every single evening from that night forward, without being asked. The first time Min-Jae brought flowers, Anna touched them gently before smiling. They smell beautiful, she whispered softly. Min-Jae stared at her quietly. You can tell. Anna smiled softly while brushing her fingers across the petals carefully. I can't see them. Her smile deepened slightly. But from the smell, I know they're beautiful. Something inside Kang Min-Jae broke quietly after that, because somehow this blind woman still found beauty in things easier than people with sight ever did. He began to notice this everywhere. The way she described what she imagined colors to be based on temperature. Red was warm, blue was cool, gold felt like the first hour of morning against skin. The way she knew the personality of a room before anyone introduced it to her, reading it through sound and air and the particular weight of other people's moods. She said once that loneliness smelled faintly of metal and expensive fabric, and that most of the men in places like Noir Lounge were the loneliest people she had ever been near. He had said, "You've spent too much time among dangerous people." She had said, "I'm here with you, aren't I?" He had not had a response to that. He had thought for a brief, sensible period around day 2 that he would stop coming, that this was a weakness he could identify and therefore eliminate. He had eliminated many weaknesses over the years. He was extremely good at it. He sat in his office on the second evening and looked at his schedule and told himself he had better things to do than sit in a lounge watching a woman play piano. He arrived at the lounge at 9:45. He sat at table 12. He stayed until she finished. He did this 3 more times before he accepted that he was not going to stop. On the 4th night after her second set, he walked to the stage himself and asked her name properly. Not because he'd forgotten. He knew her full name, her address, her father's debt record, the school she'd attended in Lagos before coming to Seoul at 22 on a music scholarship that ran out before she could finish. He knew all of it, but he wanted to hear her say it. She said it like it was just a name, like she had no idea what she was doing to him. Anastasia Ezekwi. Anna mostly. Anna, he repeated. She tilted her head. Say it again, and I'll think you like me. He did not say it again, but he sat down without being invited and stayed until the lounge closed for the first time in his life. His men stood outside in the rain and said nothing because their job was to protect him, and their collective survival instinct was telling them clearly that whatever was happening in that lounge was the most dangerous thing their boss had encountered in years. Rain always made Seoul look lonely. The city lights blurred softly against wet streets, while expensive cars lined outside Noir Lounge beneath the stormy night sky. Inside the luxury lounge, music played, glasses clinked, rich men laughed too loudly. And at the exact same table near the piano, Kang Min-Jae sat waiting. Again, one bodyguard leaned slightly toward another and muttered quietly, "Boss has been here every night this week." Watching only one woman. Dangerous. Very dangerous. Because Kang Min-Jae did not repeat routines for anybody. Yet, here he was again, waiting for Anna. Min-Jae checked the entrance once. Then again, his jaw tightened slightly. Late. Interesting. Anna was never late. Not once. Something cold settled in his chest instantly. Without warning, he stood. The bodyguards immediately followed. Boss! Min-Jae ignored them completely and walked toward the rear entrance of the lounge where staff usually arrived. Then he heard it. Laughter. Cruel laughter. And suddenly his mood darkened. Outside the lounge, rain poured heavily against the pavement while 3 drunken men stood around Anna cruelly. One of them held her white walking stick high above his head while the others laughed loudly. "Come on," one mocked cruelly. "Find it." Anna stood, soaked beneath the rain, trying to remain calm. "Please give it back." Her voice stayed steady, but Min-Jae heard it, the humiliation hidden beneath it, the careful steadiness that was not calmness but endurance, the voice of someone who had learned to survive cruelty without letting it show, because showing it only made things worse. One man stepped backward, teasingly, while dangling the walking stick farther away. "You can't even see where we are." More laughter. Then suddenly, Anna slipped. Her shoes lost balance against the rainwater, and she crashed painfully onto the wet pavement. The men burst into louder laughter instantly. "Careful," another mocked. "Blind people should stay home." Min-Jae stopped walking. The air changed immediately around him. Cold. Dangerous. It was the particular stillness that preceded catastrophe, the moment before the storm when every living thing goes quiet because survival knows what's coming. The bodyguards behind him visibly stiffened because they recognized that silence, that terrifying silence. One of the men finally noticed him standing there and immediately went pale. "Oh shit. Too late." Min-Jae walked toward them slowly. Long black coat moving softly beneath the rain. Expression empty. Eyes dead. Anna heard the footsteps instantly. And somehow, even through the rain, she recognized him immediately. Min-Jae. That voice. God. That soft way she said his name always did something dangerous to him. One drunk man laughed, nervously trying to recover. "Mind your business." The gun appeared instantly. Cold black, metal pressed directly against the man's forehead. The laughter died immediately. Rain fell harder around them. Nobody moved. Min-Jae's voice came out terrifyingly calm. "Pick up the stick." The man's hands trembled instantly. "Yes, sir." I said, "Pick it up." Anna's breathing caught softly. "Oh no. No, no, no." She recognized that tone, that terrifying stillness, and somehow she knew he was seconds away from violence. Min-Jae. His eyes stayed on the men. Min-Jae. Anna slowly stood despite the pain in her knees. Rain soaked through her afro hair, while blood lightly stained her palm from the fall. And God, something about seeing her hurt nearly drove him insane. "It's not worth it," she whispered softly. Silence. Then softer. "Please." The gun lowered instantly. The bodyguards exchanged shocked looks immediately, because nobody calmed Kang Min-Jae down. Nobody, except apparently her. One man quickly handed back the walking stick with shaking hands. Sorry." Anna accepted it quietly. Then suddenly, a voice spat cruelly from behind them. The owner of the lounge stepped outside under the rain with irritation all over his face. "For God's sake," he snapped angrily. "Just take that blind girl away already." He continued bitterly. "She scares customers looking like that anyway. Poor thing should know people like her don't belong in places like this." Everything froze. Anna went completely still. The rain suddenly sounded louder. Min-Jae slowly turned toward the owner. Dangerous. Very dangerous. The owner swallowed hard instantly. Too late. The punch landed so fast nobody processed it properly. Crack. The owner flew backward against the wall, unconscious immediately. Anna gasped softly. One bodyguard muttered under his breath, "Damn." Another man panicked and suddenly pulled out a gun shakily toward Min-Jae. The atmosphere exploded instantly. Bodyguards reached for weapons. Rain hammered violently against the ground. And Kang Min-Jae? He walked toward the gun, fearlessly, like death personally offended him. "Do it," Min-Jae said coldly. The man visibly shook. "Boss," one bodyguard warned quietly. But Min-Jae kept walking forward. Cold, emotionless, terrifying. Then suddenly, Min-Jae. Anna's voice cracked through the chaos. Everybody froze. She stood near the car, trembling, slightly beneath the rain. "Come back to me." Silence. God, the way she said that. Not "come back here." Not "stop fighting." But "come back to me." Something shifted instantly inside him. Min-Jae stared at her for one long moment. Then, slowly, he stepped backward away from the gun. The men immediately panicked and ran. Actually ran. Because nobody wanted war with Kang Min-Jae, especially after surviving him once already. Rain continued falling, softly afterward. Quiet now. Anna stood breathing unevenly beside the car, and Min-Jae suddenly realized she was crying silently, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like she'd learned long ago how to hurt softly. That destroyed him more than the insults did. The car ride became painfully quiet afterward. Anna sat wrapped in Min-Jae's coat while his driver moved silently through rainy Seoul streets. Min-Jae sat beside her motionless, still furious, still trying not to kill somebody. Anna noticed immediately. "You're glaring again." "I should have shot him." "That feels slightly excessive." "He humiliated you." Anna looked down quietly. Then, softly, "It happens." Silence. Min-Jae turned toward her instantly. "What?" Anna forced a tiny smile. "People usually become cruel after they realize I'm blind." She shrugged lightly, trying to sound unaffected. "I'm used to it." That sentence physically hurt him. Used to it. God, how many times had she endured this alone? How many times had she walked into cruelty and walked back out of it, holding herself together with both hands, making sure nothing broke where anyone could see? "How?" he asked quietly. Anna blinked. "How what?" "How are you still?" He struggled briefly for the word. "Soft." Anna smiled faintly. "Because if I let bitter people make me bitter too." Her fingers tightened gently around the coat. "Then they win." Silence. Min-Jae stared at her quietly. And for the first time in years, he felt ashamed of the darkness inside himself. Because he had let them win. Every person who had hurt him, every betrayal and loss and act of violence. He had let them reshape him into something harder and colder until the original shape of him was buried so deep he'd forgotten it existed. Anna had been living with the same cruelty and had somehow refused to become it. He didn't know what to do with that. It felt like a mirror, and he wasn't sure he could stand what it showed him. Anna suddenly laughed softly. You almost murdered somebody for me. He deserved worse. That is both romantic and deeply concerning. A tiny smile touched his mouth. Dangerous woman. Then, softly, there's another reason I stayed at the lounge. Min-Jae's attention sharpened immediately. What reason? Anna hesitated slightly. Then, quietly, my father owes the owner money. She laughed weakly. He let me play there to pay the debt little by little, at least until tonight. Min-Jae felt something cold move through his chest again, because suddenly everything made sense. Why she kept enduring humiliation. Why she stayed despite the whispers. Why she smiled through cruelty. She wasn't just performing courage. She was buying her father's peace with her own dignity, night after night, and never once complaining about the price. God, she was carrying everything alone. You should have told me. Anna smiled sadly. You already look at me like you want to destroy the world for me. Her fingers brushed lightly against his sleeve. I didn't want to give you another reason. That touch, that tiny soft touch, ruined him completely. He did not speak again for the rest of the drive, but his hand found hers in the dark of the back seat and stayed there, fingers intertwined, warm and certain, while soul bled past the rain-streaked windows around them. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. Min-Jae took her home with him. Not asked. Took. Because after tonight, there was absolutely no way he was letting her return alone. His penthouse overlooked the glowing Seoul skyline beneath the rain. Everything in it was expensive and cold and impeccably arranged by people whose names he didn't know. There were no photographs. There were no personal objects. There was nothing that said a person lived here, only a man who slept here in between being someone frightening. Anna stood quietly near the entrance after his driver left. This place smells expensive. Min-Jae removed his coat slowly. That's not a compliment. No, she smiled softly. It absolutely isn't. She tilted her head the way she did when she was listening to a room. It also smells empty. Silence. How are your knees? They currently hate me. Sit. The command came softly, dangerously soft. Anna obeyed quietly. Min-Jae returned moments later, carrying bandages and antiseptic. Then slowly, very slowly, he knelt in front of her. Anna's breath caught instantly. The feared Mafia boss carefully held her injured leg with surprising gentleness while cleaning the wounds. And somehow, that felt more intimate than anything else. More honest. Like this was the version of him that existed before the Empire, before the blood, before he built walls high enough to keep out the whole world and started calling it strength. You're quiet, he murmured. Anna swallowed softly. You're kneeling. So, you look like the kind of man people kneel for. Silence. Then, quietly, only you make me want to. God, that sentence. Anna stopped breathing properly for a second. The tension between them deepened instantly. Warm now. Heavy. Dangerously emotional. Min-Jae's fingers brushed softly against her skin while wrapping the bandage carefully. Anna's heart betrayed her immediately. Fast. Too fast. You make caring for people look terrifying, she whispered softly. His eyes lifted toward her slowly. You make me want to care. That did something unbearable to her chest, because nobody had ever chosen her this gently before. Nobody. She'd had people pretend not to notice her blindness out of politeness, and people who defined her entirely by it out of pity, and people who simply didn't think she required the same quality of care as someone who could see. But nobody had ever knelt in front of her on a cold floor in the middle of the night and handled her wounds like they were handling something precious. Anna slowly reached forward. Her fingers touched his face, carefully, tracing his jaw, his lips, the tattoo near his neck. Min-Jae froze completely. Her touch was so soft, so careful, like she was learning him slowly, like she was reading him the way she read everything. Through contact, through the information that the hands could gather when the eyes could not. "You feel sad," she whispered softly. Silence. "Then, you feel lonely too." That almost broke him. Min-Jae turned slightly and kissed her palm first, slowly, like worship. Anna's breathing shook instantly. Then finally he kissed her. Deep, emotional, devastatingly gentle. Anna melted against him immediately while his hand moved softly against her waist, pulling her closer. Rain tapped gently against the windows while the kiss deepened slowly into something warmer, hungrier, more dangerous, but still emotional, like two lonely people finally finding warmth, like two people who had spent so long surviving that they had forgotten what it felt like to simply live. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing unevenly, Anna whispered softly against his mouth, "You're dangerous." Min-Jae's forehead rested gently against hers. "I know." They sat like that for a long time, foreheads together, the city glittering below them through rain-washed glass, his hands resting on her waist and hers pressed flat against his chest, right above the heartbeat she was already learning the rhythm of. Neither of them moved. Neither of them needed to. Kang Min-Jae was making breakfast, which was unfortunate for everybody involved, especially the eggs. Anna sat at the kitchen counter, trying very hard not to laugh, while smoke slowly rose from the frying pan like a warning from heaven itself. "Something smells violent," she said carefully. Min-Jae glanced at the pan coldly. "It's fine." The toast suddenly burst into darker flames. Anna immediately covered her mouth, trying not to laugh. "Oh my God, it's still edible." "No," she laughed. "That bread has accepted death already." Min-Jae turned off the stove with the expression of a man deeply offended by breakfast. He had, in his adult life, ordered things from 5-star restaurants at 3 in the morning, negotiated over meals that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and sat across tables from men who were afraid of him while eating food he didn't taste because he was too busy calculating. He had never once simply stood in a kitchen and made something for another person. It turned out he was extraordinarily bad at it. Anna finally burst into full laughter. Warm, beautiful, uncontrolled, and unfortunately, Kang Min-Jae found himself staring again, because every time she laughed, the mansion felt less empty, less cold, less haunted. He had lived here for 4 years, and in all that time the kitchen had been a place where staff made food and left it covered and quiet. Nobody had ever laughed in it before. He hadn't realized until right this moment how much silence costs a person over years and years of it. "You're staring," Anna whispered between laughs. "You're annoying. You're emotionally attached to burnt toast." A pause. Then suddenly Min-Jae laughed. Actually laughed. Not the small, dangerous smirk she was used to. A real laugh. Deep, warm, alive. Anna froze instantly, because hearing Kang Min-Jae laugh felt strangely intimate, like discovering softness hidden inside a storm, like stumbling into a room you didn't know existed in a house you'd been visiting for weeks. The laughter faded slowly from him, and suddenly silence filled the kitchen, heavy, emotional. Anna's chest tightened softly, because somehow this terrifying man looked younger when he laughed. Less lonely, like a version of himself he'd lost somewhere along the way and had stopped looking for. Min-Jae noticed her quietness immediately. "What?" Anna smiled softly. "Nothing." "Anna." Her smile deepened slightly. "I think that's the first happy sound I've heard from you." That sentence hit him harder than expected, because maybe it was true. He couldn't actually remember the last time he had laughed like that. Not a controlled sound deployed strategically. A real one. The kind that catches you off guard because something is actually funny and joy moves through you before your defenses can stop it. He called his chef 15 minutes later and had a proper breakfast made. He sat across from Anna while she ate and pretended to look at his phone and didn't look at his phone even once. She knew. She always knew. She aimed a small smile at her orange juice and said nothing about it, and it was the kindest thing anyone had done for him in years. The chemistry between them became dangerous after that. Not rushed, not chaotic, worse, slow. The kind of intimacy that sneaks into people quietly until suddenly they can't breathe properly without each other nearby. The kind that rearranges something fundamental inside a person. Shifts the furniture of the soul, so that when they're gone the room feels wrong. Anna started sleeping in his shirts, which Kang Min-Jae found deeply distracting, especially because she walked around his penthouse barefoot, looking soft and beautiful, while his expensive black shirt swallowed her smaller body completely. He had never given anyone his clothes before, not once. It had seemed like a particular kind of intimacy he wasn't interested in offering. Now it happened naturally, and he didn't know when he had stopped minding. Very dangerous woman. One evening, she stood near the giant windows, listening to rain, while Min-Jae watched her from the couch, silently. She had her head tilted slightly toward the glass, the way she did when she was listening to something the rest of the world couldn't hear. He'd learned to recognize that posture. He'd learned 100 things about her without trying. Her tells and her rhythms, and the specific texture of her different silences. Anna smiled softly. You're staring again. You're wearing my clothes. You sound possessive. I am. The butterflies in her stomach were becoming physically irresponsible. Anna slowly walked toward him, then softly climbed onto his lap. Min-Jae's hands immediately settled against her waist instinctively, like they belonged there. And honestly, maybe they did. Anna touched the tattoo near his neck gently. You know, she whispered softly, for someone so feared, you're very clingy. His eyes darkened instantly. You complain too much. That's because your face is emotionally stressful. A faint smirk touched his mouth. Then suddenly he kissed her, deep, slow, dangerously emotional. Anna melted against him immediately, while rain tapped softly against the windows behind them. The kiss became warmer gradually, hungrier, but still intimate, still emotional, like both of them kept trying to say things mouths couldn't properly explain. When Min-Jae finally pulled away, Anna's breathing had become uneven. You kiss like you're angry at loneliness, she whispered softly. Something shifted behind his eyes immediately, because somehow she always understood him too easily. He pressed his lips to her forehead next, slowly, like punctuation, like the kind of sentence that doesn't need a period because it already means everything. Anna closed her eyes and let herself stay there in the warmth of it. Outside, Seoul went on being dangerous and beautiful and indifferent. In here, something was growing quietly in the space between two broken people. Days passed strangely, peacefully after that. Anna slowly learned the hidden version of Kang Min-Jae nobody else saw. The man who silently fixed blankets around her when she slept, who pretended not to enjoy her teasing, who stood outside the bathroom door while she showered for safety, and who watched her play piano like she was the only real thing left in his life. She learned that he took his coffee black and too hot, that he had a specific way he folded his coat over the back of a chair, that he fell asleep reading case files and would never admit it. She learned that he flinched, barely, but she could hear it. She could always hear the things people tried to hide, when cars backfired in the street below. She learned that he hummed sometimes, late at night, music that had no name she recognized, melodies that sounded like they belonged to someone else's life, someone younger and safer. She thought about that, about a boy who hummed. She learned that the empire he ran was enormous and complicated, and that people came to him with problems because he solved them, always without sentiment, and that this had made him powerful and profoundly isolated in equal measure. She learned that no one in his life told him the truth, They told him what he wanted to hear, what kept them safe, what preserved the relationship they depended on. He existed in a hall of mirrors, and had been doing so for so long that he'd started to suspect the mirrors were all there was. Anna told him the truth, about everything, including himself. She did it gently but without apology, and he discovered, to his considerable surprise, that he liked it, that it was a relief, that being truly seen, even when the seeing was uncomfortable, was infinitely better than being managed. And Min-Jae, he became addicted to her voice, her laugh, her softness, her intelligence, to the way she made darkness feel survivable. He noticed things he had stopped noticing in other people years ago, the way she used smell and sound to navigate a room with such quiet competence that guests sometimes spent whole evenings not realizing she was blind at all, the way she never asked for help but accepted it when offered without making it feel like charity. One night, they sat together beside the massive piano inside his mansion. Anna's fingers moved softly across the keys absent-mindedly, while Min-Jae sat nearby drinking quietly. The city lights stretched into the distance below them, Seoul sparkling like something that had never heard of violence. Then, softly, "What's your dream?" Anna paused slightly. "A piano school." Min-Jae looked toward her immediately. She smiled shyly. "I want blind children to learn music without feeling different." Her fingers brushed gently across the keys. "I want people like me to feel seen." Silence settled softly. Then, quietly, "You will." Anna laughed softly. "You say things like you control the economy." "I practically do." She gasped dramatically. That was not a joke. A faint smile touched his mouth again. He smiled more now. Anna noticed every single one. She cataloged them the way she cataloged music, each one slightly different, each carrying its own weight. She kept them like small private treasures. Then, quietly, "What about you?" Min-Jae frowned slightly. "What about me? What's your dream?" Silence. Long silence. Then, quietly, "I don't sleep well." Anna blinked softly. "That's not a dream. It's the truth." The room became quieter after that. Min-Jae stared toward the dark windows. "I haven't slept peacefully in years," he admitted quietly. "Not without alcohol. Or pills." Anna's chest tightened instantly. Oh, so even sleep abandoned him. She thought about the boy who sat beside his mother's piano. She thought about everything that had happened to that boy to produce this man. She thought about all the years between then and now that must have felt like surviving a disaster that never quite ended. She slowly reached for his hand, then whispered softly, "Come here." Min-Jae looked at her quietly, then obeyed, because somehow he always obeyed her softly. Anna gently pulled him down beside the piano, then began playing, softly, beautifully, and suddenly Min-Jae froze completely, because he recognized the song instantly. An old love melody his mother used to play for him as a child during stormy nights. Before darkness consumed his life, before violence, before blood, before loneliness, the exact same song. He had mentioned it once, just once, briefly, without thinking, the way you mention things that have become part of the texture of grief. Not dramatically, just as a fact. She used to play a particular song. He hadn't thought Anna was listening that closely. He hadn't thought anyone had. Anna played peacefully without realizing what she had done to him. And suddenly, Kang Min-Jae couldn't breathe properly, because for the first time in years he felt safe again. Not the controlled, manufactured safety of armed men and high walls and knowing exactly where every threat was coming from. Real safety, the kind you only feel when you are completely yourself in front of another person and they have not run. A single tear gathered silently in his eye before he quickly looked away. Anna immediately stopped playing softly. "What's wrong?" Min-Jae shook his head once. Nothing. But his voice betrayed him. Anna slowly turned toward him, then gently placed her hand against his chest, right above his heartbeat. Silence. Then softly, "I see you now." That sentence destroyed him quietly, because nobody had ever truly tried to see him before. Not the feared Mafia boss, not the criminal, not the monster Seoul whispered about. Just him, the boy who sat beside his mother's piano. The boy who learned that love was temporary and pain was permanent, and it was safer to stop wanting things you couldn't hold. Min-Jae suddenly pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, emotionally, desperately, like he didn't know how to survive this kind of tenderness properly. Anna kissed him back instantly. Soft hands against his face, warm breathing, the piano melody still floating quietly around them. And somewhere during the kiss, Kang Min-Jae realized something terrifying. He was in love, completely, hopelessly, irreversibly. Not the practiced possession he sometimes called love when it was convenient. Not control dressed up in expensive gestures. This was the real thing, the kind that rearranges you at the cellular level, the kind that makes you suddenly, terrifyingly aware of everything you have to lose. He held her tighter. She held him back. That night, for the first time in years, Kang Min-Jae slept peacefully. No alcohol, no pills, no nightmares. Just Anna sleeping quietly against his chest while rain tapped softly against the windows. He lay awake for a long time after she fell asleep. Not from anxiety for once, from something closer to wonder, from the strangeness of peace after so long without it. He memorized the weight of her against his chest, the rhythm of her breathing, the way her hand rested open and trusting against his arm. He thought about his mother, about a house that smelled like rice and piano music and something he had no name for anymore because he'd been without it so long. He thought about the boy he used to be before the world taught him that softness was a wound and kindness was a weakness, and the only safe emotion was the one that other people were afraid of. He looked at Anna sleeping and understood, finally, quietly, without drama, that she had been slowly dismantling every wall he'd built since he was 12 years old. Not by force, not by strategy, simply by being exactly herself, completely and without apology, and assuming that was enough. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. The next morning, Anna woke up to voices downstairs. "The debt is cleared," Min-Jae said simply. Anna's breath caught softly. "What?" Min-Jae looked toward her quietly. "I paid it." Silence swallowed the room. Min-Jae's eyes moved slowly toward Anna and softened instantly. "Because she deserves peace." Anna crossed the room slowly and found Min-Jae by the sound of his breathing and placed her palm flat against his chest, the way she always did. Right above the heart he'd spent 20 years convincing everyone he didn't have. He covered her hand with his. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. "You're going to make it very hard for me to keep my emotions professionally managed," Anna said finally. "Good," Min-Jae said. She laughed into his shoulder. He pressed his lips to the top of her head. Outside, Seoul was already loud and rushing and enormous with ambition. In here, something quiet was becoming permanent. He had not planned to love her. He had not planned to let her in. He had not planned any of this. The flowers, the table, the laughing in kitchens, the sleeping without nightmares. It had happened the way all true things happen, without asking permission, without waiting for a convenient moment, arriving in the middle of a dangerous evening in a room full of frightened people, when a woman sat down at a piano and played something that sounded exactly like the inside of his grief. He wasn't sure he believed in things being meant. He had seen too much of the world that happened randomly and cruelly for that. But he looked at her standing in his kitchen in his shirt with her hands wrapped around a coffee mug and her face turned slightly toward the window, and he thought, if anything was ever supposed to happen, it was this. 3 months later, a crowd gathered quietly inside a beautiful music hall in Seoul. Soft gold lights, elegant black piano, fresh white flowers everywhere. Children were already there, 12 of them, small and various, and some with canes and some without, seated in rows with the patient, and slightly bewildered expressions of children who have been told something wonderful is happening but don't yet know what. Anna stood frozen near the entrance, breathing unevenly. "What is this?" she whispered softly. Min-Jae stood behind her quietly, then gently placed keys into her hand. A beginning. Anna's fingers trembled slightly. "This hall. Yours." Silence. Then, softly, "For your piano school." Anna completely stopped breathing. Tears filled her eyes instantly. "You remembered. You said blind children deserved somewhere to feel seen." Fresh tears slipped slowly down her cheeks. Min-Jae stepped closer carefully, then softly, "So I built it." That broke her completely. She pressed both hands over her mouth, and the tears came properly then. Not the quiet kind she'd learned to cry when she was alone, but the open kind, the kind that didn't care about being seen. And Min-Jae stood in front of her and said nothing, because some moments don't need words, and he was finally learning that. He had commissioned the hall 7 weeks ago, the day after she told him about the dream. He'd had his people source the piano, a Steinway, concert grade, the kind that could hold any sound you gave it. He'd spoken to a music education nonprofit in Lagos and a blindness advocacy organization in Seoul and a curriculum designer who specialized in sensory learning. And he'd done all of it quietly, without telling her, in the spaces between their mornings and evenings, in the hours she didn't know about. Not because he needed credit, because she deserved to walk through that door. One of the children, a small girl with close-cropped hair and a walking cane, tugged at the sleeve of a staff member and asked in a loud whisper whether the crying lady was the teacher. "Yes," the staff member whispered back. The girl considered this. "Teachers aren't supposed to cry," she said. "Sometimes they do," the staff member said. "It means they really wanted to be here." Anna turned toward Min-Jae, emotionally overwhelmed. "You dangerous, emotionally unavailable man." A tiny smile touched his mouth. "You talk too much." Anna laughed softly through tears before pulling him into a kiss. Deep, warm, healing. The kind of kiss that felt like home after surviving loneliness too long. The kind that said, "I found you, I'm staying. You don't have to be afraid anymore." Min-Jae held her face in both hands and kissed her back with the same careful tenderness he'd applied to bandaging her knees on a rainy night that felt like a lifetime ago now, and also like yesterday. When they finally separated, the children in the rows behind them had started quietly clapping, the way children do when they don't fully understand what they witnessed but can feel that it was important. The sound made both of them laugh, and while soft piano music filled the hall around them, two broken people quietly realized something beautiful. Sometimes love doesn't arrive to fix you. Sometimes it doesn't arrive with instructions or explanations or any clear sense of what it's doing there. Sometimes it just sits down next to you in the middle of your damage and says, "I'm not leaving." And sometimes, if you're very lucky, if you're brave enough to let it, that's exactly enough to change everything. Kang Min-Jae, the Devil of Seoul, the man who had built an empire from fear, looked at the woman who had walked into the wreckage of him with music in her hands and found something worth keeping. And Anna, who had spent years navigating a world that pitted her and underestimated her and told her that darkness was a limitation, stood in a room full of children who were exactly like her, in a building that someone had built because she was worth believing in. She sat down at the Steinway, put her hands on the keys, paused for just a moment, fingers resting lightly on the keys without pressing, head bowed. The children went absolutely still. Even the youngest ones, even the ones who had been fidgeting and whispering, seemed to understand that something was beginning, and began to play. The same song, always the same song, the one that had started everything, drifting out across a lounge full of frightened people and finding the one man in the room who needed it most. It sounded different now, fuller, less like longing, more like arrival. Min-Jae sat in the back row among 12 small children and did not attempt to look like he wasn't feeling everything he was feeling, which was a first. One of the children looked up at him solemnly. "Are you her boyfriend?" the boy asked. Min-Jae considered the word. It felt approximately 17 sizes too small. "Something like that," he said. "She's really good," the boy said. "Yes," Min-Jae said quietly. "She really is." He watched her play. She was smiling. It occurred to him, sitting in a small chair designed for a 9-year-old with his knees near his chin and a child on either side of him watching with enormous serious eyes, that he had spent years being the most powerful person in any room he entered. Doors opened. People moved. Conversations stopped. He had built this, carefully, deliberately, from nothing, using the only materials available to him at the time: fear and intelligence and an absolute refusal to be hurt again. And it had worked. He was safe. He was powerful. He was completely, comprehensively alone. He looked at Anna at the piano and at the children watching her with the particular attention that children give to things they have decided are real, and at the flower someone had placed on every surface of this hall that he had built without telling her. And he thought, this is what I was protecting myself from. This specific thing. This warmth. This belonging. This feeling of being part of something that could be taken away. He had been protecting himself from the only thing that could save him. He was done protecting himself. She was smiling. Not the polite professional smile she'd worn at Noir Lounge while navigating cruelty with grace. This was the real one, the one that reached her whole face, the one he had decided, without making any announcement about it, to spend the rest of his life finding reasons to cause. Outside, Seoul was Seoul, loud and relentless and beautiful and dangerous, exactly as it had always been. But in here, the music played on, and for the first time in a very long time, neither of them felt alone inside it. Anna played the song all the way through, and then she played it again because the children asked her to, and Min-Jae sat in the small chair and let it happen to him completely, without resistance, without the part of himself that usually stood at the door of his own feelings, checking credentials. Afterward, when the children had been collected by parents and caregivers and the hall had settled into its own particular quiet, Anna sat on the piano bench and Min-Jae sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. She reached for his hand in the dark. Found it without searching, the way she found everything, through certainty, through some knowledge that had nothing to do with sight. "Thank you," she said. He did not answer right away. He turned her hand over in both of his, the way he had on the first night. He bandaged her knees and held it carefully. She let him. The city hummed beyond the windows. Somewhere distant, Seoul was conducting its usual business of ambition and danger and beautiful, illuminated indifference. In here, a man who had forgotten how to be human sat beside a woman who had never forgotten how to be herself, and the distance between who he had been and who he was becoming felt, for the first time, like a journey worth finishing. He said very quietly, "Don't stop playing." Anna turned toward him. "The song." "Everything," he said. "Don't stop." She squeezed his hand once, firm and warm, the way you hold onto something you have decided to keep. Then she put her hands on the keys again, and the music began.